The Memphis Grizzlies won a game for their culture against the Washington Wizards. We're going to talk about that, plus some positive injury news for once for Memphis, and preview tonight's game against the Charlotte Hornets, second night of a back-to-back against one of the worst teams in the NBA. Shouldn't throw stones if you live in a glass house, I know, but the Memphis Grizzlies aren't quite as bad as Charlotte, and they aren't quite as bad as the Wizards. I'll explain why. On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is another wild and wonderful Wednesday here on Locked On Grizzlies, and I am so grateful to have you with me wherever you're joining me, whether it's on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. It is I, Joe Mullinax, and I am flying solo and happy to have you with me on this Wednesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Become an everydayer if you have not already done so. Join myself and my co-host, Michael Cole of Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. And each and every time an episode comes out, be with us talking Grizzlies basketball here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated, I can assure you. And wins are much appreciated. Maybe you're in the camp of wanting to tank and you want the team to lose. I'm on record as saying I don't care, right? If they lose, obviously it helps the standings. On yesterday's episode, we had a great conversation about if you were able to improve your odds at becoming a millionaire, wouldn't you do it? Same kind of concept in terms of trying to get better odds at this pick. But at the same time, you don't want to have a culture of losing instituted and ingrained in your players. And I think that was the biggest thing that stood out to me against the Washington Wizards on Tuesday night. It really was interesting to see the difference in the two teams because the Wizards were, in theory, the more talented team, right? Like, look at the Washington Wizards starting five, compare it to the Grizzlies starting five on this night. Deni Avdija, who is one of the better young players in the NBA, one of the better wings. He's really had some strong games this season, and he's a pretty stout defender at this stage. You've got Jordan Poole, gets paid very well, obviously not the best player, but gets paid very well. Wasn't a starter in this game. I got to correct myself, but he played a lot. Six-man kind of situation for Poole. Kyle Kuzma, highly valued at the trade deadline. Corey Kispert, former first-round pick. We are very aware of Tyus Jones here in Memphis. We know what he brings to the table. Bilal Coulibaly, again, a young player, but talented. The Wizards had guys out in this game, but I think it was four, mostly bigs, which obviously we'll talk more about. That did help Memphis in some ways. But it's hard not to look at the guys who suited up and actually played meaningful minutes for the Wizards and then look at the names that the Grizzlies trotted out there. Aside from Luke Kennard and Santi Aldama, none of these guys were going to be in the mix for meaningful rotation minutes if this team was healthy. Maybe you want to argue for John Conchar. But Trey Json, two-way contract. Jordan Goodwin, not in the mix. Wayne and Gabriel, not in the mix. Jake LaRavia would be on the team, but not in the mix in the rotation. G.G. Jackson, probably still on a two-way contract if the team was at full strength. And we can, talk until we both get red in the face about how that might work out. But the reality is G.G. is playing more for the Grizzlies, whether that's good or bad in the long term, we'll find out, than he ever would have played if the team was at full strength. You look at the two squads, and Memphis should have struggled more than they did in this contest. And don't get it twisted. The second half belonged to the Wizards. Washington won the third quarter by 8. They won the fourth quarter by 5. Memphis limped to the finish line, but they were able to nurse the lead that they built in the first half. Just enough, well, not just enough. They won by double digits, but enough to win. The Grizzlies were up by 8 at the end of one. the Grizzlies were up by 25 points at the end of the first half. An embarrassing display from the Washington Wizards as the Grizzlies put plus 17 on their heads in FedEx Forum. There's lots of individual performances we can talk about. Trey Json very clearly took it personally that the Wizards did not offer him a second 10-day contract, did not do for him what the Grizzlies have done for him, and have made him a two-way player, of course. And now Jemison figures to be a part of the team, at least in the short term, moving forward. That didn't happen in Washington. I think Jemison wanted to show the Wizards what they were missing out on. And again, I mentioned the lack of a true big for the Wizards in this game, a true center. You could argue Kyle Kuzma was the center for the Washington Wizards throughout the contest. That resulted in Jemison shooting 11 of 13 from the floor, only got 6 rebounds, but still an impressive outing for him offensively. He led the Grizzlies in scoring. We could talk about that. We could talk about Luke Kennard putting up 8 assists alongside 13 points, making 50% of his threes, continue to be one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. We can talk about G.G. Jackson, whose three-point shooting has come back down to earth, but he got to his spots in and around the paint almost at will. Attempted 6 free throws. He was aggressive in the near and around the basket. That was nice to watch. The ball was moving well. You saw some strong offensive juju and juice from players that you wanted to see more from. Jake LaRavia continued his solid shooting performance, especially again inside the three-point line. The Grizzlies won this basketball game against the Wizards, shooting 24.2% from beyond the arc. Tells you how bad Washington played. And it also tells you how strong the Memphis Grizzlies culture is. And I do think that is the biggest takeaway. Because again, on a recent episode, I asked, have the Oklahoma City Thunder pass the Grizzlies by? And one of the reasons why I am not ready to say that definitively yet, I agree with DeMichael that bringing up the topic and having the conversation, it's good for podcasts, and it's also worthy of asking because the Thunder have been that impressive this season in their overall body of work. But the Grizzlies have experience developing the type of team that the Thunder hope they can be, and the expectation of execution, the understanding of awareness of where your teammates are and where to get a better shot than just a good shot, and the frame and state of mind to play with the kind of effort that guys like G.G. Jackson showed hustling down the floor to get a block late in the contest. When it was time to make a winning play, G.G. Jackson did so. And as fun as G.G. can be at times watching him play offensively, the 30 points he scored against the Thunder, it's stuff like that play that I just mentioned. I'm sure it's on X, ESPN, find the highlights. The way that he sprinted down the floor showed his athleticism, his ability to leap and get that defensive play going. That more than anything gives me confidence for the future regarding this Grizzlies team. Am I as excited about them beating the Washington Wizards? No. The Wizards don't have a culture. I feel bad for Tyus Jones. I wish we could kind of smuggle him away and save him, right? That would be wonderful to have in this current state of affairs. Tyus could certainly start the rest of the year. So it's tough right now for Tyus in Washington. And he didn't shoot particularly well, but his assist-to-turnover ratio, I believe, was 9 assists to 1 turnover, remained to lead in that specific way. Tyus was a part of that culture for a few years here in Memphis, and he helped build it. And John Morant still on that bench. Brandon Clarke still on that bench. You've got guys that are in the mix that are continual pieces of what is happening in Memphis, and they're eventually all going to be back on the floor. And when they do return, alongside G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. and these other pieces that have developed in this gap year, the culture that has been established going back to 2019, while it's certainly been challenged, don't get me wrong, the John Morant issues, lots of stress in the last 12 months of whatever the Grizzly standard is. That will pay off in the long run if they are able to maintain who and what they are as a basketball organization on the court. That matters tremendously. And it was fun to see that matter once again on Tuesday night. That was a pleasant surprise. Coming up on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we will discuss some injury updates for Desmond Bane and Brandon Clarke, some stuff to be excited about. We will discuss that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home a win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to United States customers. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking Desmond Bane, Brandon Clarke, injury updates, positives. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo this episode. No DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. But DeMichael's going to be with us in spirit because we're about to talk about one of his great articles over at the Commercial Appeal. Before we do that, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars. March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the best Major League Baseball season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Be the first one to get local insight from MLB experts on the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th, again, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, on the Locked On Sports Today 24 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Good stuff there. The Grizzlies beat the Washington Wizards on Tuesday night. That's wonderful news, right? And it was a win for the culture above all else. But before that game, DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal, my wonderful co-host here on Locked On Grizzlies, he's got some good injury intel about two key Grizzlies that both DeMichael and myself want to see suit up a few more times before the 2023-2024 campaign, the cursed season that has been this gap year for Grizzlies basketball, is over. Desmond Bane, Brandon Clarke, Taylor Jenkins talked about both of those guys, giving injury updates, saying Desmond Bane is progressing to 5-on-5 scrimmaging. That is usually the final step that Grizzlies players take before they return to the floor. That is a massive deal. To quote from DeMichael's article, Bane is working really hard, so I envision in a couple of games here, he's back in the lineup. That is from Taylor Jenkins himself. Again, progressing to 5-on-5 in the past couple of days. Desmond Bane last played, of course, on January 12th. He injured his ankle against the Los Angeles Clippers. It was a grade 3 ankle sprain. Hasn't been back since. That was 2 months ago, roughly now. So that's great news. You want to see Desmond Bane back on the floor. We talked about the culture a moment ago. The culture of the Grizzlies being strong enough that one of your leaders wanting to get back out there in a lost season, you want to see him alongside G.G. Jackson. You want to get a larger sample size of those two together. Next to Vince Williams Jr. as he comes back from his own various bumps and bruises. You want to try to get as close to what your key players are going to be going into next training camp on the floor as possible to get as much of a data point, whether the Grizzlies make a big trade, whether they think they don't need to. Jaren Jackson Jr. can play the 5. They need another big. Do they get them in the draft, free agency, whatever the case might be? All sorts of topics that we're going to talk about right here on Locked On Grizzlies as the offseason grinds forth soon. But we're still in season right now, and you want to see Desmond Bane get some reps, some live NBA minutes with the likes of GG and Vince Williams Jr. Another injury update, perhaps a little more surprising, but DeMichael and I both expected Bane to return. Marcus Smart, not so much. And conspicuous by his injury update absence was Marcus Smart. Desmond Bane got an answer, and we got some info on Brandon Clarke as well. Brandon Clarke entering the 3-on-3 part of his return. He starts 5-on-5 workouts this weekend. He has not gotten to the same point as Bane per se. He's further behind than Bane. And I think being patient with Clarke makes a heck of a lot of sense because of the nature of the injury, right? A grade 3 ankle sprain is painful and worthy of sitting out a couple of months. But at the same time, a torn Achilles, that takes the cake. You want to make sure, especially for a player, I've said this over and over again, dear listener, dear viewer, for a player with the skill set of a Brandon Clarke, you want to make sure that he returns at a place where he can have that ability to leap and leap again in a very rapid fashion. That's part of what makes him a very good basketball player for the Memphis Grizzlies. And clearly Memphis values him in that fashion. So you want to make sure he has that, or at least as much of that as he's going to have coming off of the injury. Patience is a virtue when it comes to Clarke, but they are encouraged. Again, quoting Taylor Jenkins from DeMichael's article, really encouraged by all the signs he's been showing. Jenkins said he's on schedule. We're hopeful that sometime maybe at the end of the month, he's in a Grizzlies uniform. So do the math. Jenkins said in the next couple of games, and I'm using Jenkins's words, not mine, talking about in a couple of games here, Bane will be back in the lineup. Maybe we see Bane early next week. And then maybe at the end of next week, you start seeing Brandon Clarke, and that gives these guys 10 to 12 games together as the season concludes. That would be beautiful. That would be wonderful to see, because that puts them in a position to develop chemistry. The player that Desmond Bane is now is not the same guy that he was when Clarke was healthy this time last year before he got injured. Bane has grown as a facilitator. He's grown off the dribble. A Desmond Bane, Brandon Clarke pick and roll combination would be a lot of fun to watch. And that secondary facilitation that Bane has developed, along with the elite finishing of Brandon Clarke, working on that timing. There is no substitute for in-game live NBA reps. There just isn't. Regardless of who's playing, regardless of the effort, the attitude, whatever the energy might be, the closest thing that you're going to get at this stage to live in-game action is what the Grizzlies schedule will be the remainder of the season. So if Bane is cleared, get him out there. Let's get him some run. If Brandon Clarke is cleared, get him out there. Let's get him some run. I'm intrigued by seeing Vince Williams Jr. with Brandon Clarke, both in terms of defensive versatility, the switchability of both of those guys. We talked about Bane as a secondary facilitator alongside Ja. What about Vince Williams Jr. as a theoretical runner of the second offense? Now, Taylor Jenkins rarely goes with a true second unit, but in the theoretical, Vince Williams Jr., Luke Kennard, GG Jackson, Santi Aldama, insert big man here, MLE, draft pick, whatever the case might be, trade. In that logic, if Brandon Clarke is your guy that's going to get a lot of run with Vince Williams Jr., don't you want him to, again, live reps? We haven't seen that at all. Desmond Bane has played with Brandon Clarke before, obviously. Brandon Clarke has not played with Vince Williams Jr., at least not any significant amount. He certainly hasn't played with GG Jackson at all. And if you truly believe that Vince Williams Jr. and GG Jackson have the capacity to be rotation players on a basketball team that is trying to win an NBA championship, are we trying to win a title or not? I'm going to continue to ask that question. And as that question gets asked, wouldn't you like, if possible, to see two key components of that championship rotation, including one guy who's a part of your big three core? Don't you want to continue to build that camaraderie, build that chemistry with those two new pieces of the core? I most certainly do. And I'm guessing you do too. You can let me know in the comments, of course, if you agree with me, disagree with me. Should Bane just sit out the rest of the year? Are you team tank? Do you want to lose as many games as you can? Don't get me wrong. If Memphis goes over the rest of the way, as long as they're competing, if they're not embarrassing themselves like the Washington Wizards did on Tuesday night, especially in that first half, as long as that's not happening, I'm cool. Because I know that they're undermanned and they are dealing with a situation that most teams in the NBA aren't dealing with. But if I can get Desmond Bane out there getting reps and run with GG Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. and Brandon Clarke by the end of this month, sign me up, man. Because those are guys that you're counting on when this team is, in theory, going to be good again. Fingers crossed, if you know what I mean. But it wasn't that long ago that the Memphis Grizzlies were viewed as title contenders. And if they hope to take that leap back into that position, the more you can see Bane and Clarke, guys of that ilk, alongside, of course, Jaren Jackson Jr. But again, we've seen Bane with Clarke and Jaren. The more you can see those three, a lineup of Bane, Vince Williams Jr., GG Jackson, Brandon Clarke, Jaren Jackson Jr., I want to see that before the season ends. And it sounds more and more likely that we're going to be able to do so. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to finish out this episode taking a look at the Charlotte Hornets coming to Memphis, another home game for the Grizzlies tonight in FedEx Forum. Charlotte recently lost to this Wizards team by double digits. Doesn't mean that the Grizzlies should overlook them, especially in the second night of a back-to-back, but it's another hapless opponent coming into FedEx Forum. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's demon time on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Whether you want to pick Luke Kennard making more than 2 threes, maybe you want to put Trey Json getting more than 8 rebounds, whatever the case might be, you can have a blast over at Prize Picks. And again, the demons and the goblins, they make it all the more exciting. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from another retirement account with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim is as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to United States customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Grizzlies, Hornets. Again, if you can't get excited about NBA basketball at this state of the season, I don't know what you got pumping through your veins, but it ain't blood, brother. It ain't blood. The Memphis Grizzlies finding a way to get a victory over the Wizards. Again, that Wizards team was bad, especially in that first half. They found some life, won the second half technically against Memphis, but the gap was so wide that the Grizzlies were able to basically cruise ipso facto, given a G.G. Jackson block here, a Luke Kennard assist on an alley-oop there. Memphis finds a way to win. The Charlotte Hornets come in tonight, and it's going to be fascinating to watch this Hornets team led by a Miles Bridges, who has a lot of baggage to him, but he also has a lot of game to him, if we're being honest with one another. The ability to score the basketball in bunches, he still has that, and that is a guy that, you know, if Jaren Jackson Jr. plays, depending on who's actually in the lineup for the Grizzlies, again, it's a crapshoot at this stage of the season, but Jaren sat out the first night of the back-to-back. You hope that he plays against the Hornets. Who draws that assignment? Who defends Miles Bridges? That would be my first major question for these Grizzlies going into this game, because he's the one guy for Charlotte that you really have to worry about offensively. That's not meant as disrespect to Brandon Miller, the strong rookie for Charlotte, who's really had a pretty impressive second half of the season, scoring and facilitating and finding his footing as an NBA player in his own right. But Miles Bridges is the guy that you really need to look for. The last game that the Hornets won against the Brooklyn Nets, Miles Bridges was a major reason why. Bridges put the ball in the bucket, 10 makes on 15 shot attempts. Again, Miller made 10 of 21. Miller had 23 points, but Miller also shot 2 of 10 from 3. He was not as efficient as Miles Bridges was, and that is significant. And Bridges can also clean up the glass. And that is a strength of the Hornets that bears watching against this Grizzlies team. In that win that Charlotte had against Brooklyn, 45 rebounds for Charlotte. 45 rebounds, out-rebounded the Nets by 4. Obviously, the Grizzlies, that's not their strength at this current moment and current incarnation of this roster. They don't have the bodies to consistently rebound like that. So if they allow a Miles Bridges to get in the paint and get some rebounds, if they allow my personal favorite, if they're going to make a trade, the Grizzlies that is, and not go fee-fi-fo-fum in the draft, you could probably tag a couple of second-round picks and a end-of-rotation guy for Nick Richards. And Nick Richards has really done some strong things for Charlotte again. In that win against Brooklyn, the last time Charlotte won, Nick Richards had a double-double, 15 points, 11 rebounds in 31 minutes. And that was against the beloved target of so many in Grizzlies fandom, Nick Claxton. Claxton did not have as good of a game as Nick Richards. You could argue maybe they played to a stalemate. But the fact that Nick Richards on a much friendlier contract, Claxton figures to make 20 or so million in free agency more than likely. I believe Richards is under contract the next 2 seasons at about $5 million per. That's a much more friendly number for the Memphis Grizzlies if they go that route. So it'll be fun to watch Nick Richards play. It'll be fun to see Brandon Miller. The Hornets feel like they have more of a direction than the Wizards do. Maybe that is a blind shot in the dark on my behalf. They obviously have similar records. They're both among the 4 worst teams in the NBA, alongside the Spurs and the Pistons. And that is something that the Grizzlies should be able to take advantage of. Again, even in their current state, they have the capacity to win. We saw that on Tuesday night against the Wizards. Assuming you have Jaren Jackson Jr., assuming that injury list, even if Jaren's out again, assuming the list is shorter, right? You get a couple of those guys back. You had Scottie Pippen Jr., who was doubtful for last night's game. We've talked about numerous times, DeMichael and I here on Locked On Grizzlies. Usually that means they will be questionable and they will give it a go to play the next game. Well, tonight's the next game. And Scottie Pippen, another great piece written by my partner, DeMichael Cole, over the Commercial Appeal. He's excited to show that he is undervalued, that he has not been appreciated both in college and in the NBA. And he thinks that this is his opportunity to make the most of the moment and finally prove that he is a worthy NBA player and he belongs on this Grizzlies roster long term. DeMichael wants to see more of Scottie Pippen Jr., so do I. Assuming he comes back, that adds another body of depth that Memphis can rely and lean on. Hopefully Jaren plays. Hopefully we start to see some other movement around some of these injured guys just resting on the first night of the back-to-back as opposed to the second half. It'll be interesting to watch how the game plays out. But again, Nick Richards is somebody to watch, both in the short and long term for Memphis. Who defends Miles Bridges is going to be a major piece of this puzzle. And can they find a way to improve their three-point shooting? Because again, the Grizzlies beat Washington by 12 while shooting 24% from beyond the arc. Gigi Jackson, 1 of 7. Jake LaRavia, 1 of 4. Jordan Goodwin, 1 of 5. They made 8 threes, the Grizzlies did. And 3 of them were from Luke Kennard. So they really, beyond Luke, had some issues shooting the 3. Santi Aldama, 0 for 5. That can't continue to be a thing, especially for a guy that I'll speak for myself, I assume he's a part of the conversation long-term for Memphis. But if he doesn't find his footing, maybe it's Santi Aldama and a couple second-round picks that get set to Charlotte for Nick Richards. Can Gigi Jackson play the 4? Sounds like a topic for a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Friendly reminder about Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube, of course. You can also find it on the Free Fire Amazon TV channels app. Make sure you're going and looking for Locked On Sports Today, the Major League Baseball preview next week, all those fun things. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, however you get podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, all those wonderful places, YouTube, of course. Shoot us a comment. Let us know how we're doing, how you like the show. On our next episode, I'll be back with you flying solo post-game. We will talk Grizzlies Hornets. We will see how the injury report stacked up, who played, who didn't play, and we'll look ahead a little bit to the schedule that remains for the Memphis Grizzlies in this season, especially now that we have the carrot that is Desmond Bane and Brandon Clarke likely playing in the next couple of weeks. Maybe we can point out a couple of games that might make sense for those two to make their returns. And in the case of Clarke, his season debut. Thank you again. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Memphis Grizzlies fans. Great win for the Grizzlies against the Wizards. Hopefully they pick up another one against the Hornets. At least hopefully they compete. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stick around. Locked On